What's up, Resurrection students? It's Blake from Resurrection West, and we are continuing our Explore series where we're talking about stories from the Old and New Testament. Now, let me tell you something. All of us are someone, and all of us come from somewhere. Have you ever thought about your heritage? Or have you ever thought about your ancestors before? Growing up, my grandparents would tell me a lot of stories about my ancestors. Now, some context. For me, I'm German-Russian. My ancestors are originally from Germany, but moved to Russia in the mid to late 1800s. In Russia, being a Christian wasn't the most popular thing at that time. A lot of Christians were actually persecuted because of their faith. So my ancestors, they actually had a Christian newspaper that they would distribute to other Christians in the area. It would have Bible reflections, devos, and kind of talk about what was going on in the current time. But the time that they were living in was still really, really tough. Food was scarce, Christians were often killed of their beliefs, and so my ancestors said, let's try to have another life, maybe in another country where it might be more promising. And so they tried to come to the United States, but it got complicated when they tried to enter, so they ended up entering through Canada. Eventually they settled in South Dakota. Here's a picture of my ancestors. Now this is just one part of my ancestral history. I also have traits, I guess, that date back to England and Wales. There are also parts of my ancestry that my family hasn't even been able to track yet. If you've never asked your family about your family history or ancestry, do it. Now, ancestry in the Bible was also a big deal. In the Bible, people were chosen to be in a relationship with God and were given opportunities to fulfill tasks. In the Old Testament, we don't have Jesus walking around earth yet, so God would communicate to people through visions and dreams, or God would talk directly, or do miracles like talk through a burning bush. Check out that story in Exodus. But there's a story in Genesis about God choosing a man named Abraham. Hear these words in Genesis 15, verses 1 through 7. After these events, the Lord's word came to Abram in a vision. Don't be afraid, Abram. I am your protector. Your reward will be very great. But Abram said, Lord God, what can you possibly give me since I still have no children? The head of my household is Eliezer, a man from Damascus. He continued, since you haven't given me any children, the head of my household will be my heir. The Lord's word came immediately to him. This man will not be your heir. Your heir will definitely be your very own biological child. Then he brought Abram outside and said, look up at the sky and count the stars if you think you can count them. He continued, this is how many children you will have. Abram trusted the Lord, and the Lord recognized Abram's high moral character. He said to Abram, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land as your possession. Now, what's going on in that story? Abraham is your average man and a follower of God, and God shows up to him in a vision. He's pretty old, probably 90 or 100 years old at this time, and he's never had any children. But God appears and they are having this conversation about who's going to be the next heir. Like who's gonna carry Abraham's family on, like who's gonna be the ancestors after him. But he doesn't have any children. And God says, your own child is gonna carry your family line. In fact, there are gonna be more and more people a part of your family than you could even imagine. Have you ever made a family tree before or been on Ancestry.com or ask older people in your family, where are we from? I would encourage you to do that. And what you will find is that your family history, it goes back a long time. Some people can trace their family history back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Your family probably entered America at some point, unless you have indigenous heritage. Your family might have spoken a different language than you speak now. They probably had different jobs or careers than maybe what your family is doing now. Ask your family about your family history. But in this story, Abraham was not considered someone who was going to progress his family line. He thought, it's gonna end with me because him and his wife are really old. They had no children. But God decided to still choose Abraham to have children. And the reason is because he knew Abraham had a strong faith in God. God chose Abraham, and Abraham didn't say, no thanks, please go pick someone else. Abraham said, all right, God, we're gonna figure this out. And 40 generations later, we get Jesus from Abraham's family. I don't know if Abraham knew at the time that one of his great great times 40 grandchildren was going to be Jesus. But what God did completely exceeded Abraham's expectations. Students, this is what we should remember. God chose Abraham, and Abraham trusted God. Out of all the people on earth, God chose Abraham to be in a relationship with. What is also important for us to remember is that God chooses us too. Although Abraham, his family, and descendants were God's original chosen people, through Jesus, we all now have the opportunity to be chosen for a special personal relationship with God. We all now have the chance to be friends with God, which was a phrase used to describe Abraham. Just like any relationship, it is a mutual give and take. We are called to trust God and obey and follow God. God allows us to be used to bless others in this world. Have you thought about how you are trusting God? I think about my ancestors again. They had to flee their country because they were scared. They left all their family and friends and comfortability behind, and they got in a boat. And I think the whole time they were pretty scared, and I think they said, God, we trust you though. And when plan A didn't work out for them, they went to plan B. I think they were still pretty scared. But they kept saying, God, we're gonna trust you. Some of the areas I feel like I can trust God is knowing that God will give me strength in moments that seem too tough for myself to handle. I feel like I can trust God in knowing that God's always going to love me no matter what, and that God has a plan for me, even when it doesn't quite make sense at that moment. Students, God chooses all of us to do great things. What we have to do though is trust God back. Remember that you are chosen, and remember that you can trust God to guide you through anything.